Welcome, everybody, and thank you to Tony, who has been playing with us throughout our GAIA journey, for that beautiful musical entrance and welcome to us all. And a warm welcome to those of you who have been with us for the last 11 weeks, and to those of you who may just be joining for the first time tonight, or this morning, wherever you may be, whatever time zone you may be in. I am standing in what is now known as New York, and was once inhabited by the Wickwascook tribe, a part of the Lenape. And we have been together for a full day here in this place and in many others around the world, beaming through the screens. We had Martin Kalungu-Banda with us this morning, and Melanie Goodchild here with us as well. And we've had a Spanish and Portuguese session in which many of you have already been. And for those of you who, again, are just joining, it's wonderful to be here with you all gathered in this way. I'll share my screen and just give a little bit of a snapshot of where we have been over the last 11 weeks here in the GAIA journey, where we are activating intention and action, and really tuning into what is needed now in our time. And this week is week 11. We are in the inhale, and the inhale is part of this kind of digestive experience of us being able to process what's going on in our world and what is possible. So in many ways, we are noticing and seeing that much is ending, and there is quite a bit that we need to let go of. And in fact, this evening, for those of us who were here with Melanie earlier today, Melanie is now taking much of what we are needing to let go of and that we petitioned for in our world to Niagara Falls and sending a ceremonial bundle over the falls. So she is with us and we are with her, and in many ways she supported us to connect into this place of dropping into the breath, dropping into this journey together. And we've been doing this for the last 11 weeks in this kind of, when I look at this, I kind of see this roller coaster of emotions that many of us have been on, with facing a global pandemic, with being present to many of our economic and global systems, in some ways collapsing or pausing. And we've been joining together every 2 weeks and being in this global community where we can cross-pollinate and just learn from one another and experience what is happening and start making sense in different ways, what is going on. And we're coming towards the end of our journey that we've been on, which is modeled on the Theory U journey. And in the beginning of this, we were really just kind of staying with and doing the deep listening and dialogue. And then we moved into a process of deep resonance, which, really allowed us to tap into this vertical place of tapping into source and just listening into what really was staying, what we were seeing and sensing, and what was possible for us to move into. And now we're in this place of moving with, where we are starting this vertical social prototyping process, and really just beginning to tap into what might be possible as we move towards movement building, as we are part of a global movement, as we are part of movements in our place, and in the impact areas that we've been gathering in. Many of us joined yesterday to start prototyping in macro hubs, so these impact areas that allow us to really focus on where we can have an impact, where we can apply our interest and our passion and what we're really being called to do in this time to a particular industry area or acupuncture point, as we call them, where we can kind of move the energy that's needing to move now. And today we have a very special guest in store to really guide us around movement building, Tyler Norris, who we'll introduce in just a little while. And, as I speak to you from New York, I noticed that we are also, as much as we've been going through this global pandemic, we are also, maybe because we've been able to pause, looking at some of the systemic injustices like institutional racism, and really looking at what that means for this country and for our world. So I pass it over to Otto, who will take us through continued framing of our current moment.
Thank you, and good evening, good day, good morning to everyone. The last 2 weeks have been really difficult, and whenever you see a country, a continent going up in flames with protests in more than 150 cities across the nation and across the world, we feel that something much deeper is maybe broken, and something much more fundamental may be at stake. While the COVID-19 situation that we have been contemplating earlier felt like a significant shift, open our eyes on all the levels of interdependency, on how we interconnect with each other, with all beings on this planet. And in many ways felt like an opening of the mind on the level of the collective. The last 2 weeks, however, felt different. The killings of Ahmaud Arbery George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and our collective experience of watching these killings has resulted in a profound shift. A shift that not only impacts how we see the world, but a shift that impacts how we feel, how we are connected with each other. And in many ways, it feels to me like something, it felt, I think, to me and to many of us, that our heart broke. It broke down and it broke up. And something melted away that maybe before kept separating us. So I want to invite us, before we move into this session, to explore the deeper dynamics that we all feel somehow, to explore them a little more. And you may remember earlier kind of this distinction, which really is a distinction between presencing and absencing, between two different places we can choose to operate from. The place of opening our minds, heart, wills, or a place of a freeze reaction, closing our mind, heart, and will. And when we double click on the latter, kind of the upper half here, what we see playing out right now are three different forms of violence and racism. The first one is direct violence. That's the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that the police officer's knee was on George Floyd's neck. 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a brutal killing, which is, on consideration, a direct continuation of 401 years of slavery and racism against Black people in this country. So the first blind spot that I noticed in my own perception has to do with not fully seeing the unbroken continuity of police brutality throughout the past 400 years, resulting in a little distance to what actually is happening, right? A shade of, a version of ignorance, a version of doubt, relative to the real situation on the ground. The killing of African American people by police is not new. What's new is that now we have the smartphones, so we all can see it with our own eyes. The second level is structural violence. Structural violence is not the knee of the officers for almost 9 minutes on the neck of African American people, but it's the knee of collective structures and arrangements that have led to shocking levels of inequality in terms of wealth, income, health coverage, economic opportunity, and democratic participation. The issue of voter suppression. This knee has been for 401 years on the African community's neck. Thus, the second blind spot that I noticed in my own perception has to do with something that I see, but I don't feel. Yes, we all know about the disturbing levels of inequality and the issues of structural violence and institutional racism. But did I really feel it? Did I truly empathize with that? And maybe here too, I'm not the only one noticing that now. Noticing my own role and participation in othering, in distancing myself from something emotionally, from something that's happening. The third form of violence and racism has to do with attentional violence, not seeing another person in their highest future possibility. An example for that here in the United States is the educational system that gives vastly different educational opportunities to different groups of people. While countries with the most advanced educational systems, like Finland, offer free quality education for all and shift resources to the most disadvantaged, here in the US, we are busy doing the opposite. Shockingly different levels of educational opportunities stacked according to levels of income and privilege. In short, the current US educational system works pretty much like a caste system, cementing rather than opening up the different layers and classes. So the third blind spot has to do with the following. While the first blind spot is not seeing, and the second blind spot is seeing but not feeling, the third blind spot is seeing and feeling but not acting. This issue has to do with a frozen will that is frozen by fear of fanaticism, leading to depression in the case of fear, or destruction in the case of fanaticism. So when you look at all these three forms of violence and these three blind spots together, they lead to a cycle of trauma and self-destruction. Which is exactly what we see going on right now, not only here, but also in other parts of the world. What is it that we can do to transform this pattern of violence and self-destruction towards healing and well-being for all? While the upper cycle of absencing is based on architectures of separation, basically where we distance ourselves from each other, from ourselves, and also from nature. The lower cycle of presencing is based on architectures of connection that leads to cultivating unconditional witnessing that allows us to truly see reality as it really is, unconditional love to truly hold each other in difficult times, and unconditional courage and confidence to supporting each other to realize our highest potential. So that's basically what we are trying to do together here, creating these deeper containers for healing and for connecting with our highest future potential. So I want to invite Eva, who has been heading our research group, to share a little bit about your observations on the data that you saw, on the interviews, the focus group that you had. So given what I just shared, do you see anything going on? Or if not, kind of what is it? What are some of the patterns that you see? So can you kind of mirror back to us what you have been noticing?
Yeah. And I think from the research perspective, I can speak to really our collective effort to be in the lower half of that last slide. Because one of the things that has surfaced from the research is, people saying this is hard to do, and it's very hard to do alone, right? It's a collective kind of endeavor. So one of the things that the research has allowed us to do is to kind of look at how this collective has been evolving over time. And I think the thing that was really striking in the most recent survey, and the reflections that people shared with us, is a real shift in kind of the complexity of the reflection shared, especially compared to the last survey, which was in the first week. And what we received were these accounts that were very multidimensional in terms of how people describe their experience, including like holding paradoxical dimensions of the experience. And a real sort of level of nuance around people's reflection of self and reflection of the collective. And you'll see some of that in a moment. And so for us as a research team, when we sort of stood back from the data and looked at it as a whole, kind of asking, what's the story here? What came is really the story of a social field kind of deepening. And the word maturity came up for us, right? So this sort of collective deepening and maturing. And that's kind of the backdrop of the last round of data. There are a lot of really specific shifts that people shared. I think the one that I would touch on that relates most to what you've been talking about, Otto, is it's related to the theme of clarifying intention, which came up very strongly and has all sorts of pieces connected to it. But what was particularly striking is the way that people are sensing into their intention. And I would describe it as sensing into their intention from the whole, which is reflected in comments like, I'm wondering what my part is within this broader collective intention, or I want my actions to be in solidarity with the whole. And so there's a sense there, certainly for me, of not only being aware of, our relationship to the system and how our behavior impacts the system, but really a sense of being the system, which speaks to a certain kind of collapse between, the separation between self and collective and self and system. So those are just a few observations and comments, but what I'd really like to do is kind of bring some of this data alive by sharing a video that Rachel put together for us, which shares some of the voices from the focus group. So you get a sense of the reflections that come from dialogue and from a holding space. So if we could share that video now, that would be great.
Acceptance is my main shift. I can accept more because of the deep listening, I think, and the inclusion for the community. Because I was falling into those traps of polarization before, but now I do not do that anymore. It's better, I do more of inclusion in my thinking and in my acting.
The source is very much around just paying attention to what I'm thinking and conversations. There's a lot more listening and curiosity, and it feels as though that has been a source for me.
In regards to what's the right thing to do and in relation to the higher self, isn't this like clear in our body? For example, I'm feeling something when something really, really feels right, I can just feel it with my body. because there's this flow inside, and this feels like a yes to life. And so that's maybe a question that are wondering, what are the choices we need to make, I want to make.
It really has been a slowing down, and has brought into clearer focus what's of true importance for me.
It seems to be consistent now over the weeks that we have this energy. This energy is consistent, is holding that virtual space, or that space for me to be more of myself, to be more authentic, to be more aware, right? To practice loving awareness, and to connect with people from different parts of the world, and to hold myself more accountable in my actions, my words. So it's been very special in that sense.
The community built up very fast, just lockdown started. So now 10 weeks after, we are like a solid group.
We did the social processing theater, and I could feel, I could touch it. It was kind of a magical moment for me. I could touch that there was something in between, and that something in between gives me strength.
There's people around the world that are sharing this, so we are not alone. That's the point, I think. We are not alone. I'll leave it there.
So I would like to just say a thank you to everyone who's taken part in these groups, both the people that you see and the people who you don't see, but who are there holding the space for these reflections to surface. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Antoinette.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Otto. Just what a powerful statement from all of those who participated in these focus groups, and Otto, what powerful framing. Every time I see it, I feel like I go through another layer of understanding about it. So thank you to everyone who has been building this. And so Nancy just kicked us off in our Zoom comments, but it might be really wonderful to just hear from each of us. And I'll just invite us to take a breath together and really sense into what is happening for you, what is happening in my own body, in my own context, my own community. How am I sitting with what I just heard, and what's while we spoke to the examples of the U.S. context, what may be happening in your community, and how may you be responding to it. So the invitation that I'll give is to put one hand on your chest, maybe by your heart, and one hand on your belly, maybe just below the belly button. And this was an invitation also from Martin Kalungubanda, who invited us to connect vertically, to connect into source, to drop into the body, into the feeling space. So if you can get both feet flat on the ground, you can try that. And perhaps feel some uplift in the spine. And rather than seeing the breath as going in and out on a horizontal level, perhaps allowing the breath to move up and down from the base of the spine to the crown of the head. So on an inhale, feeling the pull down the spine into the base. And on an exhale, feeling the energy and attention rise to the top of the head, maybe just above the head, to the sky, to possibility. Just follow that inhale and exhale. And as you notice in the following of the breath, what may be coming up for you, you can turn your energy back to the community, to the chat and the Zoom or the comments in YouTube, And just type in what may be coming up for you, what you may be sitting with now. And I know that some of us have already started, and that's wonderful. And I will check out the chat and the comments and read out some of them just so we have some of our voices in the room. We'll get more voices as we do the harvest later on in the session. From Lisa, systemic dysfunction through the mechanism of fear separates us and makes us feel alone. We are never alone. Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. From Gandhi. Thank you, Willie. Tears behind my eyes. I was crying most of the day today. Awareness of love in action. How big can I play? Going bold. Pain and shame. Feeling held and connected by the whole globe. We are not alone. I am you and you are me and we are it and it is us. Reminds me of Martin bringing in the term Ubuntu. I am because we are. I am because you are. And all that can mean and take with it. Racing through time, but feeling still inside. Discomfort. Time to listen. The enormity of our sensing together makes me weep. Feeling like things in me and around me are splitting and confusing. Loss of human contact doesn't mean loss of connection. Hope. It's beyond words, felt sense for days, as though gravity was heavier, as though the air was thick, hard to breathe. This time is about being heartbroken and having the courage to walk and be with the fear, at the same time being courageous to transform still. Thank you so much for all of your comments and connection, and all of the just tapping into our ability to feel and our ability to be in this moment together. With that, I turn it over to Otto to introduce Tyler.
Thank you. I just wrote, I read a comment on that the dialogue with others here in the GAIA community added an organ of perception to my own body. So I thought that was also really resonating. And my own feeling really I'm sitting with is these days, particularly here in this country, but also in general, is one, vulnerability, so that everything is very, very fragile and at risk. There's a lot at risk. Anything could happen, right? So, and it could go either way. So that's one feeling I have. And the other feeling I have is from, and you saw it in the eulogy by Al Sharpton also yesterday, from the experience that there is something collapsing on an emotional level, a distance that we used to have that no longer is there, an enormous amount of confidence that this collective experience is creating the foundation for a movement that will reshape the country and reshape the world. So I want to welcome Tyler Norris into our conversation. Tyler, you are CEO of a Wellbeing Trust. which has the mission to advance the mental, social, and spiritual health of the nation. And earlier, in your life, there were many other roles, but one of them was vice president for total health at Kaiser Permanente, where you had a leading role in really reshaping and reimagining, and also reshaping kind of health from a whole system perspective, which means shaping, working with anchor institutions and communities, and shaping, putting resources into, and developing traction around environmental, economic, and social determinants of health. So I want to welcome you after a long day you had, we talked about that a little earlier, into our conversation. And we are so happy to have you, particularly because the more recent story of your lives and works journey really has put you into a place kind of where you co-shape movement building, which is very much what we need in all countries, in all sectors, because without a strong movement, nothing helpful is going to happen. And but before we get into that, Tyler, I want to invite you just to share any feelings on the current situation that you may be sitting with, and also invite you to share a little bit the story of maybe your first formative experience. You have been working your whole life with communities, really, community and movement building. What was kind of a first formative experience that launched you into that, kind of that helped you to wake up to what should then become kind of your life's journey and the journey of your life and your work?
Otto, thank you for that beautiful opening session, and all of you around the world who've shared your heart and your thoughts and your desires and aspirations for the world in the chat. It means a lot to me. Otto, just as I imagine answering your questions, I want to welcome everybody to a dialogue from Oakland, California. And I am sitting here on the ancestral and unceded land of the Ohlone people. And recognizing that I am here on their land, I'm wearing a necklace that I was given by a leader of the Ohlone people a couple of years ago, when in Oakland we had a meeting called Wellbeing Legacy, asking a question of, we may not be able to shape the legacy that we've inherited, but we can shape the legacy that we give to the next generation. And I remember asking her what she thought we might do, trying to activate and move this movement in the country for equitable well-being. And she said, just be who you are and do what's yours to do. And I said, it's not always easy to discern that. Stand on the land and ask, she said. Welcome from the territory of the Wichin. So my heart is broken open. I find myself in a place of humility, of not knowing, from releasing myself into a faith that what's wanting to happen will reveal itself. I've been falling back on an admonition of the foundresses of the organization that I now lead, who, when I asked them, what should we do on a particular issue? There's a 70 and 80-year-old women. They said, we can't tell you what to do because we don't know. But you must take prudent risks for the poor and vulnerable by watching the signs of the times. And you'll know what to do. So that's how I am. in faith and humility and trusting that what wants to happen is going to emerge. We have a lot to talk about today, and I think it might be interesting, Otto, to respond to the question about my first real cognitive experience of what does community mean, my first visceral experience of what community would mean to my life. I was born in a loving family and friends and all, and we lived in a small community in the Pacific Northwest. And at 14, I found myself struggling with substances, struggling with mental health issues, and feeling quite disconnected from myself and the world around me. Not an unusual experience for a 14-year-old, but what did happen for me and a couple other 14-year-olds is we got ourselves into a lot of trouble, and we eventually got arrested. And so at 14, I found myself with property crimes that had me a felon. And there was a big debate in our small community, only about 2,000 people, 2,500 people. What should we do with these kids, right? And there was a community meeting with the chief of police and the principal of the school, and all the parents and my friend David and others with me that were part of this, and sitting in front going, this is the end of our lives, maybe. And I remember the principal saying, any kids that would do this to this community, I was just waiting for the penalty. Any kids that would do this to this community need this community. They need us. And the community crafted a 3-year strategy for us, which involved the restitution of paying back for the damages that we had done and the vandalism, the amends that we needed to make to people in the community, and the opportunity to clean it up. And at 18, my record was expunged, and 3-4 decades later, I sit here before you leading a philanthropy that's making investments and helping drive systems change in the country. And I think about what's going on the street today and the privilege that was part of being diverted, right? Diverted into something that was a way that gave me a chance to ask, who am I? And what am I capable of? What's that whisper of purpose in me that's bigger than the screwing around that we were doing? And that became the focus of my life, because community saved my life. And the power of community I've discovered ever since. And over the last 30 some years, I've had the chance to work in about 500 cities in the US and around the world. Public, private, nonprofit partnerships working to improve the health and quality of life of communities, of nations, of trying to practice what Alexis de Tocqueville wrote home to his fellow Frenchmen about America, what was special about America, to his French noblemen friends in 1834 or somewhere. And he said, these Americans, without anybody's permission, they meet and they discuss the issues, they discuss the possible solutions, and they make decisions and they go about doing them without anybody's permission. Of course, referring to the king, referring to power structures, and this promise of what America maybe could be, a place where citizen democracy, where people without titles after their names had the ability to change the course of the future. That town hall democracy that was sort of the greatest promise. And to this day, I suppose, perhaps at time feeling like, can this work? Will this work? Does it add up? We're still practicing that kind of democracy, of trying to bring communities together by asking, if we bring the diverse community together and give authentic room for voice and assets and gifts of a community, and provide good data and thinking and discourse, that a community will chart a healthy course for its future and hold themselves accountable to see it true. So that's the form of democracy that we're trying to unfold here, coming out of an experience of community as power, community as the font of change, community as the locus of human connection, community as the focus of driving the hearts and minds to shape policy that changes systems.
Tyler, I remember we were like, maybe that was a couple of years ago, we were sitting in Oakland, and I interviewed you, and I remember a line from back then, a theme kind of you described in this context, which is you talked about the most important, least well-told story in America is the rebirth of community from the bottom up, right? So different folks pulling together, in the context of their community across divides and making stuff happen around their commons, and really the regeneration of democracy bottom up. Is that right now where the country is at crossroads, kind of where we, either sink into collapse and chaos, or, a civil war scenario on the one hand, or really see the rise of a movement and a rise of a new coalition that will sweep away the divisive dynamics that we currently see, shaping the larger context. Where do you see that today? So would you still today, is this statement still true today? And if so, what have you seen since, and how can such a movement that is multi-local in nature level up its impact kind of to the next, to the macro level, to the bigger system changes that we know we need to see?
Otto, it's such a great question, and thanks for reminding me of that dialogue. America is such a mixed bag. We all are aware of that. So much beauty and so much challenge both. Truly underneath the radar, because nobody's in charge, are citizen-led, community resident-led dialogues in every community in this country, trying to make sense of their current reality and chart a path forward. This has been going on for decades. But because there's no organized campaign or structure or single source, this is actually a phenomenon that is rising, emerging essentially from communities to bring voices and hearts and minds together to chart a course for the future. And it is alive literally in every part of our country. And I would posit that today, with so much discrediting of leadership and of institutions and of certain structures, and even those systems and people who are supposed to protect us, not protecting all of us, that the greatest, to use the term, street cred that exists in this country is the voice of its communities rising. And what a number of us, a couple of colleagues are on the phone, Bobby Milstein and others, have noticed is that it's fascinating that in more red or conservative communities or more blue progressive communities in the United States, when you really listen to what people want, it's much the same thing. Walkable, bikeable, mixed use, access to healthy foods, transit-oriented development, locally owned businesses that plow wealth back into the communities. There's widespread agreement about this. Reforming community-level policing, local economic systems that feed with each other, going green development. That is a widespread agreement in communities. And with the vested interests such as they are politically, I think that emergent quality of literally thousands of communities of very different stripes, politically, economically, regionally, urban, rural, more black, white, brown, mixed, immigrant, that the same basic voice is rising. And in fact, right now, maybe you'll get to it later, but a number of us are helping craft a blueprint for equitable recovery and resilience in communities across America. And the whole thing is rooted in the voice of communities, which is coming not only with a sense of codified content about what it is we need to do, but a transpartisan, co-benefit constituency behind it. A business, government, nonprofit, across sectors, people of all walks of life saying that form of pragmatism, which is about all people thriving, all places thriving, no exception, is what the well-being of our nation must depend on. We're only 5 years short of being a quarter millennia old as a country, 250 years as a country. Most civilizations don't make it another round or two. And we're convinced that if in fact there is a renewal, a reimagination, a recreation of health and quality of life and equitable well-being for all in America, it will be because America's communities rise, find common voice, bring our democracy back with the credibility and the common content, constituency, and power that communities bring. The work we're doing isn't about programs and projects. It's about who's at the table, how are decisions made, and how are the resources allocated.
Okay, so two questions.
Please.
So you're saying reimagining our civilization, that's actually already happening, right? It's already underway. It's happening kind of across the country, probably many countries, but certainly across these countries on a local, multi-local level. So two questions. Why is it then that there is so what you share is kind of the best, the most important narrative not really shared, right? So why is it that the public narrative is really a country that is at war with itself? That's the current reality today. So why is that, given what you just said? And number two, so the movement building strategy, can you give us an example where you actually kind of then mobilize these bottom-up forces, this other civilization that is trying to break through to the next level of impact and visibility that would allow that to happen?
Beautiful. To the heart of the first question, are we fighting with ourselves? Clearly we are. We're fighting at almost every level. We're so deeply polarized and fragmented right now that it is showing up in every metric in the United States. I mean, our sense of thriving and well-being is at its lowest point in over a decade and a half because we're in effect at war with ourselves. We're essentially behaving as a disease in and with ourselves. But thinking about not only what the wise women who founded the organization that I lead and the wise woman Ohlone leader that talked with me, it's because we don't know who we are. We've forgotten who we are. We need to do like we do on these Zooms and get the gallery view where we look at all the screens and say, oh, that's who we are, right? We're Black, we're brown, we're immigrant, we're however many generations, we're so much shape and size. This is who we are, this is what we stand for. It's like we need to hold a collective mirror up to ourselves. We think that's what has so much promise in this blueprint that we're sort of crowdsourcing and rapid cycle to help the country have a plan forward, because it's essentially rooted in our ability to see who ourselves and who we actually are and what we're actually capable of, what we're actually bringing forward. So to me, that's really it. But the question is, how do we unlock that trapped potential? How do we unleash that? How do we understand what a movement is? And I'll go to the second question with that. What is a movement? Now, from the people on this Zoom, so many people are part of movements, have been part of movements all around the world. But what we did is we asked, what if we reverse engineered social movements in the United States? What would we learn about their qualities? And we wanted to distinguish very distinctly from a campaign. A campaign is led by a certain group of people over a certain period of time with a particular result. A movement is about distributed leadership. That doesn't mean there's not some collective leadership or collective agency, but it's particularly about distributed leadership. Dr. King, one of the greatest teachers of nonviolent movement building, called us to see each other differently, as well as to create changes to our economic and political systems. And there were certainly strategies, but the invitation was, what does that mean for me here where I stand? It was essentially an invitation to everyone to rise into the question of how am I either complicit in the challenge or part of the solution? So the movement is essentially catalyzing distributed leadership. So what we see in movements, we unpack them. We looked particularly at marriage equality movement in the United States, which most recently, many of you know, a dozen years ago, some states were starting to move towards marriage equality and domestic benefit rights for gay partners. And then there was a big pushback, and all the states started going, and the leaders around this were talking sort of tongue-in-cheek to themselves, we're gays, talking to gays, and people like gays. How do we actually open the question? And they were asking questions of Republican women in Iowa about their husbands and saying, how does it feel to have his benefits? And these women were outraged. You think I married my husband because of his benefits? I married him because I loved him, because I love him. And the whole marriage equality movement came about freedom to love, freedom to marry. And by recasting a new narrative, it opened a question that, as many of you know, 2/3 of our states moved to ratify marriage equality. And then shortly thereafter, we had it became the law of the land. So when we looked at marriage equality and other movements, civil rights, suffrage, the environment, we noticed these 7 qualities. First, a common narrative, which we've been talking about. What is the message? Black lives matter. Freedom to marry. That must be intact. It doesn't mean we all have our own story. Of course we have our own stories, but we find ourselves in a common narrative. Secondly is measurement systems. In the world of well-being, we have created a well-being in the nation set of measures rooted in all people thriving, rooted in Cantrell's ladder, the basic question of mental, emotional, social well-being. How am I doing right now? So that all of the things we're tracking is measured in a meaningful way. Third, we know we need policy strategies, not only clarity around what are the top policy strategies, but economic engines. For example, Wellbeing Trust, our philanthropy, has been investing in something called Inseparable, which is the first 501c4 policy advocacy organization, assuring that people have affordable access to mental health and substance use services in this country. Shockingly, most people don't. Economic engines that bring in new dollars and give people a chance to raise the money and mobilize the dollars. Leadership structures that are enabling ways for people to find together, not one leadership structure, but leadership structures that can be built and maintained and grown, like civic infrastructure, trust, reciprocity, cohesion, that needs to be built and maintained, but as a form of infrastructure. Standards of quality and meaningful pathways for everyone, where all means all. The most important part of this is the listening to voices. The power of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa was rooted in what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said is the basic human need is to be heard. And movement building with strategies like this, whether we're trying to reform diversion, like I experienced as a youth, so that kids don't end up in cycles of prison, or our food system, or mental health access, must be rooted in the dignity of all people to be heard. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu said, the most important need is to be heard. So if a movement is rooted in the dignity of each individual, and we bring combined voice, the healing is possible, the recognition of ourself and each other is possible, the ability to love, we need each other as ourselves, not like ourselves, but as ourselves is possible. And the ability to build community will and political will behind policy and systems change becomes possible. That's what we're learning about movement building. And it's the way we're building the movement for equitable well-being in the country. And it's the way that we're finding literally hundreds, not of people, but of organizations and communities finding themselves with common voice, common agenda, common constituency, and common power to break through and liberate this sense of our democracy for making the change that we know we must have if, in fact, we're going to have a second quarter century in this nation.
Thank you for sharing that, Tyler. What resonates with me is really the these 7 things sort of make sense. I mean, so we know we need those things. And it seems to me applicable both to very local levels, regional, state level, national, and also beyond national, right? Eventually global level. So it's applicable. And, you know, we, in most situations, we are without a movement, we actually cannot change, create the changes that we know are necessary. So this is kind of very relevant. 2 questions here. So does this work? Well, I know that's a silly, but so I want to dig really into, okay, so you're not, I mean, it's one thing to put these 7 things together and then, you know, that's just paper, right? But putting this into action, that's the real stuff. You're in the process of doing that. So what are you noticing in yourself to make this happen, right? So what's your own process? What do you need to let go? And what are you noticing about, I mean, what's kind of the core team, right? So what are the requirements for a core team to really pulling something like, is this doable, right? And what have you been noticing and moving into that direction, both in terms of your own changes, but maybe also your core collaborators?
I think the most important part of what I'm learning for myself right now as a person of privilege in and traditional leadership is that a great part of my job is to support the creation of containers that allow conversation to happen in a different way, and for decision-making to happen in a different way. And it's a humbling thing because we're essentially moving into, for me, it's been into a place where I don't know what I don't know. And that's a really powerful place, like facing a blank canvas as an artist and never wanting to paint the same thing and asking the question, what's wanting to happen here? And being more rooted in noticing, in emergence, and not my agenda, and not the way I was going to do it. So it's been for me, a chance of using privilege to create safety, to create authentic opportunity, to create meaningful discourse, to make sure that that discourse is connected to structures of policy, so it's not separate from it. But it has been a journey of trying to find my own blind spots, frankly. And the leadership for this is constantly developing. What's needed in one moment or in one place is a different structure in another place and another time. So what's powerful about the movement in the United States, because it's rooted in communities, is communities design this the way they want. And rather than there being a precondition of what a structure looks like in a campaign or how you join as a chapter, it's the anti-chapter. It's the anti-association with rules and codes. Those rules and codes is what it made it possible to hold a knee on a neck for 8 minutes and 49 seconds, because there's codes and ways of being. So what's the dismantling of codes and ways of being and structures and associations that reinforce those ways of being. That's actually what privilege is needing to do, is to move out of that kind of decision-making and creating room for a new form of decision. But the art is not actually knowing what that's going to need to look like, because I don't claim to, and I don't. And so that's the act of humility. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tyler. Antoinette, what I wonder, do you want to bring in some questions from the chat, from the community, or you want to maybe take us to a little reflection practice?
Yeah, I first of all want to thank you, Tyler, for what you just acknowledged and what you just said, because I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think it's incredibly powerful for this community to be reminded of that. Each one of us has a role in this current moment, and in all of the different places and spaces around the world where the movements may look different, and that we have to sit with that dismantling of the rules and the codes. And we have to use that art of recognizing that we don't know what we don't know. So I wonder if we sit with the not knowing. And we just feel into where we are now. And knowing that there may be great discomfort in where we are right now. And I invite us to enter into our own experience of what we just heard. And to tune into the breath. Knowing that in any moment, in any experience that we have, as we digest this information, that there are many of us on this planet who do not have the privilege to ask the questions that Tyler was able to ask of who am I? And what am I capable of? And what's that whisper of purpose? And knowing that we each have a role to play at our varying levels of privilege. Knowing what Ugachi Pataxo in the Portuguese track said, that we are the system. Each of us is part of that system, and we each have a part to play. For me, the breath gets stuck in the chest. It gets tight in my shoulders. There's rage, there's sadness. There's a hopelessness, a desire for us to do better. So I deepen the breath, and I invite us to deepen the breath together, to sit with the discomfort. And to sit with the part that you might have to play. The whisper of what we are being called into now. And as you release that attention, perhaps there's something moving through. Perhaps it's continued discord. Perhaps it's something that you feel need to be voiced, or an action that you know you need to take. Or maybe you're being reminded that it's okay to not know. We'll turn to breakouts to be able to process and continue the conversation. And you can also feel free to write if that's what you need to do. We'll turn to each other in small groups and have the conversation of what is coming up for you now. So enjoy your time together in the breakouts. And we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Returning. Welcome back to those of you who have been in YouTube and those of you who've been in Zoom breakout rooms. We're back. So thank you all for taking that time. And I know that time was definitely not long enough. And we will have a community exhale session, and we will be joined by Dr. Angel Acosta. So he will be taking us through a timeline and framework around institutional racism and a deep dive into the collective healing that is needed. So we'll be doing that on next week, June 12th. So for those of you who would like to continue that exploration, we will be doing that together and making just more time, 2 hours, time and space to drop in, including Arwana and Kelvy in that to help us process and move through continued conversation together. So, and that said, right now, we'd love to hear voices from the room. So both in the chat, feel free to share in the chat or comments if you're on YouTube. And if you would like to have your voice be heard, now is the time. You can go down to the participants function at the bottom of the screen and click on the little blue hand and raise your hand, and we can bring your voice in. I think we have Erica, so we'll go to Erica first.
Okay. Hi, how are you, everyone? Thank you so much for letting us share our experience. I think that one thing that we discussed, which was very important, is that we were listening to the speaker, but also seeing what was going on. Oh, there you are. We were listening to the speaker. We were also looking at the chat, and I think there's still a lot of pain in the fact that people, because of their ethnicity, are still struggling and failing to feel included. But at the same time, and some of the people who were participating in the chat, they have multiple nationalities. They come from families from different parts of the world. And I think one great aspect that we should include in going forward is to make sure that we can no longer make it about being Black, being white, being African. I myself, I was born in Mexico, but I'm Mexican German. And I think we need to find new ways to explore how do we bring everyone, inside, that no one feels excluded, that we do look at privilege and colonialism, but that we find new alternatives to tackle with that, because people are becoming more global, and we want people to come with the whole richness of their personality. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. We'll go to Jisen Wu next.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I think similarly our group talked about that dissonance that we feel with what we're taking in the world, and that brokenness and the pain, and also what's being shared in spaces like this, and how to reconcile that. And I was sharing that I think my heart is breaking and healing at the same time in very weird ways. Like the input of everything that's coming in feels so heavy and painful, and yet there are spaces in which I think that are so necessary, like this with GAIA, the GAIA Journey, to create spaces for healing and people to come together and to sit with the dissonance together. But I think that dissonance was shared and something that we felt reflected in each other. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jisen. We'll go to Elaine next.
Thank you. One of the themes that we are discussing in the group is how do you build enough commonality given what is happening now, what has happened before, of course. I live in Portland, Oregon, with only a small percentage of non-whites. But it doesn't make the problem smaller. And we have gathered a group of 15 people, but most of them are like me, white and privileged in a way. How do we invite, what kind of help do we seek, both within the community and maybe from above, to have a group that can work on some of these questions that Tyler was evoking? It's how to break through the natural barriers that we build when we just look for people that we can have deep conversations with. So that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine. To Ruth next.
I work as a mediator, and I work primarily with large groups in conflict. And one of the things I've learned from 25 years of doing this, and it's coming up for me all over the place in the last couple of weeks, is that groups don't tackle the tough stuff until they hit what I would call a pain point, where they actually hit a point where the current condition is untenable. They just hit a point where they realize they have to do something. They cannot leave things as they are. And until then, if I were to come in as a mediator, I would not be able to get people engaged in actually trying to do anything. And I read something of all places on Facebook yesterday that said, maybe 2020 is exactly what we needed. Maybe 2020 is the collective, the way they phrased it was kind of like the collective slap up the side of the head that the healthcare system, the governance system, the values and beliefs that we've adopted, that the whole sort of grand scheme of things has got out of kilter. And we need to pull it back to what we want to have going forward. And it struck me that there's a groan zone in mediations that people have to work through, where you have to sit with the discomfort. And that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm feeling. But if you don't sit with that discomfort, if you try and move out of it too quickly, then the solutions you come up with will not last. They might work in the short term, but they won't work in the medium and the long term. And for the sake of for the sake of the entire planet, we need to come up with solutions that are sustainable. And so I'm getting more comfortable with this lack of comfort and this discomfort that I'm feeling. And for someone who likes to be in control, that's not necessarily an easy place to be. But I really appreciate sitting with all of you and hearing what you're going through, because I feel far less alone than I did a number of weeks ago.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Powerful. And thank you for inviting us to sit with that. I'd like to bring Fiona Brooks in next.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for spending this time with me. I wanted to share the statement I've heard from Dr. Noel Nannup, who's a Noongar elder here in Australia, and he shares a story from Aboriginal storytelling of how the humans came to be the carers of everything. And to me, that is what resonates for me. I think it's our time to step back into that role that many of us have forgotten, that we, of all species, we need to be the carers of everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And I know that we have more hands, and I also know that we're nearing the end of our time. And I would like to also turn it to Kelvy for a visual resonance practice. Kelvy, there we are.
Yeah? No?
Hear you now, yeah.
Okay. You see the, can you hear me and see the drawing okay? Okay. Actually, sorry. It's big. So this has been a drawing that's come from the entire arc of Gaia, and I've been drawing into it every other week, and also throughout each Inhale day. And so this is the third session that I've been working into it. But tonight, what really started to come alive for me is this. It's kind of been turning into this sort of animal, or it's been a cow, it's been a turtle, it's been a dragonfly, it's been a bug, all these different parts, species. And this last comment around us being the carers for everything, in a way, this has felt like it's started to embody all the things we are and we can be, and all the things that we also can be caring for. And in Tyler's talking about movement building, I started seeing that the wings, like all day, the wings were very tight and thick. And all of a sudden, when Tyler started talking about movement building, it's like the wings started to open up and have some motion and fluidity to them. And so the qualities, like in every flap of the wing, is a new quality that we could be learning and practicing as we are trying to get rooted in community and help voices rise, and return some sense of dignity to our species, to all species, to the planet, and with our deep and feeling hearts where we are right now and seeing clearly. So.
Thank you, Kelvie. So I'd like to invite us to make this full screen so we can see the image fully, and for us to sit with this image and all that we've heard and all that we are holding now in this community, and in to what from our own perspectives we can see and sense in our world. And as we do this, I'd like us to just sit for a moment with the prompts that we have used each time we connect, which is I see, I sense, and I feel. Just sitting with this image, and I see, I sense, I feel. And as that becomes clear, if there's something you would like to put in the chat with that I see, I sense, or I feel, you can read some of those out. I sense we are bleeding as a society and need to heal ourselves.
I sense a newborn still covered in birth fluid, unable to live on its own, but growing stronger and stretching.
An underground river of deep pain becomes a healing hand full of compassion.
I sense a cleansing.
I feel a painful but loving birthing.
I see a birthing process. I sense the organic and inherent messiness, wanting us to embrace it. I see the rising of spirit from the reintegration of mind and matter.
I see the emerging divine feminine. I sense her bringing light to the darkness. I feel movement toward what is possible.
A painful birthing. preparing the way forward, a world we do not yet know.
Thank you all for holding this together. I would just like to invite, before we close, Otto or Tyler, if anything has come through that you would like to share with us as we close. So just turn it over to either of you now.
I'll just say I've appreciated this conversation with all of you. It's not been easy for me, I've noticed. It's been unsettling and uncomfortable, and at the end of an incredibly long week. And I'm looking at any parts of myself that want to hold it all together, that want to land it in a certain way, that want it to occur, that want to find my little subtle way of controlling. And so I was looking at the image of what appeared to be a fire on the right-hand side, and I find myself sitting in the fire. And I'm going to muster my courage to stay here in the fire.
Thank you, Tyler. Thanks to everyone. I feel this is one ongoing conversation with Melanie this morning, helping us to attend to one of the deeper wounds, the genocide against indigenous people. We'll move more deeper into the other one, the other big one, next week. And then there are so many other angles. And in the Portuguese session, the contemplative part was held by a member of the community who is an indigenous leader himself, kind of, and who claimed that we have to be the system. And this notion of the collapsing distance between us, you could really feel it there. I could also feel it in the other session. It is something that really gives me hope, even though we know it is messy. And it is a process that's probably becoming a lot more messy before it becomes different. But it's also a process that gives me a lot of hope. So thanks to everyone, and I look forward to continuing this in the weeks to come.
Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for staying in the fire. I very much feel the feeling of being in the fire together. And so grateful for your words, Tyler and Otto, and to everyone who's been sharing in the chat and in the conversation, in our continued dialogue. We've been using hashtag GAIA Journey to just be able to stay in the connection and the conversation with each other. So I encourage us to keep doing that. Many of you have asked about the timing about the session for next week. Right now, it is planned for 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. There is a chance that it may be 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, although that would not include part of the United States where there is a great deal happening that needs to be addressed. So we're trying to figure that out, and we will email you about the time that we land on. And either way, the June 12th conversation, we will share it out. We will continue that conversation in the online spaces that we have and we've created. And we will also continue the conversation, of course, in our June 19th sessions. So thank you all for being with us in the fire as we figure it out in all the ways, as we dismantle, as we stay with, and as we keep going. So, yes.
And we will email it tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
We will send out tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. All right, everybody, the journey continues. We are in it together. Thank you all. And yeah, just continue breathing. That's what I'm going to do. So we'll see you on GaiaJourney.org. Thank you again, Tyler. Thank you, Otto. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Also, thank you to Uncle Noel, who is our global elder, who has been quoted in almost every session. So as we speak to you all, thank you, everybody. Take care, and we can unmute and say goodbye.
Thank you all.